How is it?
Sucks. It's just terrible. And what they've done is they've changed the uh, GUI front end. You know,
Right.
sucks. It's just terrible. Okay, so we've changed it. Got it. Okay. Oh, verify age. They have to verify that I'm an adult. Oh, shit. Okay, bear with me here.
Yep.
So this had been stuff I would have had done ahead of time. I
No
thought I
worries.
would have the time. Although there's some things that have baffled me here, but things that I didn't know.
All good.
Okay. Center your face in the circle. Well, I'm doing that. Oh, okay. Well, said it worked. All right. Done. All right. So we are, I think we're, hold on. I want to check that one more time. Okay, what does Zoom say? Well, okay. Guess I need to do it again. Oh, man. Guess I need to do it again. Okay, we are live. Okay. I just needed to make sure. All right. Sorry about that, folks. I need to give you, it's not, I signed out of it. I need to give you a link. All right. Um, get a shareable link. All right. I'm going to put it in the chat box here. You got it there.
Yep.
So you can put that on social media if you want.
Yep.
All right. Yep. If you're watching this from the beginning, sorry, I haven't been in Zoom and YouTube, the Zoom interface with YouTube in quite a while, and everything's changed. And we had to download software and do a bunch of stuff. So, as soon as Adam shares it in his social media, we'll get going.
Driving there right now. Just a second.
Yes, it's me. I'm still signing into stuff and figuring stuff out. Oh, mercy.
Okay. Almost.
Almost. Okay.
We're posting. All right, that's there. Now I'm going to share it to the Omaha History Club. All right. All right. Those are out.
Okay, good. Well, now I need to remember to hit the record button. So we record the audio, record to this computer. All right. So again, if you are going from the beginning, I guess hopefully you kind of zipped through it. Let's do Tomorrow's World Club.
Sounds good.
Starting in 1940, the Tomorrow's World Club was a pioneering youth activism project, while adult civil rights organizations in Omaha were focused on politics. This youth led groups. Yeah,
Sorry,
okay.
that's supposed to be singular.
Yeah. This youth led group researched and documented systematic racism across the city. Their bold campaigns laid the foundation for future civil rights victories and influenced youth for a quarter of a century afterwards. Well, that's pretty exciting, Adam.
Well, Steve, it's something else. I've spent the last couple of weeks really exploring the newspaper articles that told the story of Tomorrow's World Club. I first learned about it more than a decade ago and then wrote about it a little bit in my book, hashtag Omaha Black History, African American People, Places, and Events in Omaha History. But, I really haven't done it justice until now. And this episode is going to be my first release of the information that I've collected. Some of the details are going to go into a new article that'll be on northomahahistory.com. But in the meantime, let's share this detail. There were two young people, two high school students, one named Dorothy Ewer and the other was Jack West, who became Jack West Sr. And basically, they were products of the times. In 1940, Omaha was gripped by the oncoming entry of the nation into World War II. Everybody was watching what was happening in Europe. Everybody was watching what was happening in Japan. And they could hear the drum beats beginning, and they knew that it was coming. At that point, Omaha's African-American community was tight. They were really closely knit around the region of 24th and Lake and south of that. Down to Cummings Street. Of course, there was that old historic Black neighborhood that was down at 7th and Dodge. And slowly that moved north and became known as the Near North Side. And the Near North Side grew and expanded and changed. And by 1940, it was between Cummings Street and Lake Street from 16th over to 24th or 30th, depending on where you were standing. It was a fascinating time, Steve. There was so much going on. There were Black businesses, there were Black social clubs, there were all kinds of different elements that African Americans had made for themselves because white Omaha excluded them, not by accident, but rather intentionally. There's a whole design around segregation. The U.S. federal government had started formal redlining in Omaha in 1936, but that was even preceded by 20 years by the U.S. Army, who started redlining when they called the Black Belt of Omaha that same area in 1919. So you had all this reality that was converging in 1940 between the war, between the history of North Omaha and African American people, but also the African American community itself. All these things were converging and coming together. Black people wanted good jobs. They wanted good educations. They just like they still do, of course, but then there was this vibrancy and reality of the dirty 30s, right? The 1930s and the Great Depression and everything that was happening. And the reality of African Americans in Omaha was a saying that they still use today: last to be hired, first to be fired. And Black workers were out of work and they just didn't have a lot of options. What we don't know about 1940 is that 25 years before there was ever a riot in North Omaha, young African American people were struggling for social justice and racial equity. They wanted opportunities not just for themselves as young people, but for their families and for their parents and for their aunties and uncles and for their extended communities, whether that was their church, whether that was the people that they were bullying. There was bowling lanes around 24th and Lake, Steve. There were movie theaters. There were nightclubs. There were all kinds of things, but there weren't a lot of jobs and people were suffering. So Dorothy Ewer and Jack West, young high school students, who decided that they were going to conduct a real survey, but undercover, off the radar of Omaha's businesses. They wanted to look across the businesses to find out if they were hiring Black people, Black youth, Black adults. And they wanted to address it head on and find out what was going on. In 1940, they started their survey project. They called their club Tomorrow's World Club. Dorothy Ewer decided on the name herself. She gave a great interview in the Omaha Star where she explained she chose the name because that's what they wanted to find and create was tomorrow's world. They were future oriented. So they go to these businesses that had hiring signs, that had hiring ads, and they went right into them and said, will you hire me? They didn't say they were there doing a survey. They didn't say they were there with Tomorrow's World Club. They just looked like a couple of young high school students who were looking for work. They went to downtown Omaha. They went through North Omaha's businesses along 24th Street because 24th Street was a hyper busy business district, man, all the way from Dodge Street, all the way up to Lake. And even beyond that, there were Black owned businesses, Jewish businesses, white owned businesses, all kinds of businesses that were lining both sides of 24th Street. 2- and 3-story buildings packed with department stores and grocery stores and shoe stores and every kind of store that anybody want, but also light industry. You know, people were manufacturing things. There was a great big junkyard on 24th Street. There were liquor stores, but there were also a lot of restaurants and cafes and diners and regular places for working class people. When they went out and visited these storefronts that were hiring, they were often met with blunt, racist admissions by these store workers, whether they were clerks or owners, who said, we don't hire Black people. Of course, they used the N-word. They used all kinds of grossness, Steve, but that's the way that it was at that point. Dorothy and Jack wrote this down. They did this survey and they kept going. They wanted to move from rumors because everybody knew. The way that Jim Crow worked in Omaha was that often there wasn't a formal law behind segregation. There wasn't a formal rule behind segregation. It was just the way it was. And for those of you listening along on the podcast, I just did air quotes around that because just the way it was is the way that we define de facto segregation. It was just a fact. It was just the way that it was. So this de facto segregation, Dorothy and Jack were the first people ever in Omaha's history to do this kind of survey, especially in the previous 50 years. We'll talk about another example later on. But the point is, at Tomorrow's World Club actually grew because people got into, other young people got into what they were doing. There was a young man named Art McCaw and a young adult named Leota Jones who came into these civic battles that Dorothy and Jack were engaged in. And they encouraged Dorothy and Jack to keep writing and to keep documenting everything that was going on. And they did this for 2 years. Between 1940 and 1942, the club kept going. These young people were still in high school. They were still around the community. And in 1945, they did something different. They shifted gears. For the previous entire existence of Omaha's history before 1940, Omaha Public Schools refused to hire Black teachers in high schools. Dorothy and Jack and Art and Leota noticed this. And on noticing it, they decided and became determined to get Black teachers hired. into Omaha public schools as high schools. Now, there were a couple of token Black teachers who were working in elementary schools as far back as the 1890s, which still wasn't the whole history of the city, but it was the 1890s. There were, by 1940, there was a rumor that there was going to be a Black principal in an Omaha high school, and that was a big deal. But no Black teachers in the high schools. And Dorothy and Jack and Art and Leota, they all noticed this. They all experienced it. They talked about a black belt ceiling. Talk about mixing metaphors. Black teachers were restricted only to Black elementary schools. All of those schools, of course, were north of Dodge, south of Lake, east of 24th Street. So it was Lake School, and it was Long School, and it was Lothrop School, so many other buildings. And they weren't entirely Black schools. That's not what the title Black school means in Omaha. They were schools that Blacks were prohibited, that they were exclusively allowed to attend, and they were prohibited from attending the rest of the city's schools. And that's the way that segregation worked in Omaha public schools. And the Tomorrow's World Club decided to meet that head on, and so they went right after it. The school board refused to hire these Black teachers, and with majority Black students at Lake School and Howard Kennedy School, the Tomorrow's World Club decided that they were going to move from just research into pressuring and into campaigning for integration, for faculty integration, at least in their schools. They argued that Black students needed guidance from people that looked like them, that shared experiences with them, so they wanted Black teachers. They pressured this kind of integration, this faculty integration, to the district. And after several years, OPS began to integrate and hire Black teachers to work in Black high schools. That was a long time after Dorothy and Jack graduated from school. But their club, the impact of it, continued to be felt for a long time after they were in high school. 1945, they both graduated, and the club the Tomorrow's World Club pretty much ceased to exist. Dorothy went on, though, and she continued her activism. And in 1963, she was one of the founding members of the Citizens Coordinating Committee for Civil Liberties. This was also known as 4CL, and 4CL was the organization responsible for the civil rights movement actually having deep policy impact in Omaha in the 1960s. The 4CL was put together by Dorothy along with a few ministers and other folks, and basically they brought 10,000 people to Omaha City Hall to demand an end to formal segregation in Omaha. They brought names and letters and phone calls to the city council to end formal segregation in Omaha. They brought the pressure to the Omaha public schools to integrate the faculty, and Dorothy continued in her leadership and got that change to happen. So it was a slow victory, but it was one nonetheless. Jack West Sr. went on to become a foundational figure in community organizing across the Black community in Omaha. He was the one who actually trained 4CL. He became involved with the Depores Club. He had those early roots and continued to extend them long after the work of Tomorrow's World Club. Art McCaw, who was an advisor, that young adult that we'd mentioned, he became the first Black cabinet level appointee to the Nebraska governor's office in 1952. So from his work advising Tomorrow's World Club in 1945 to the governor's office in 1952, never ever happened before. And Art McCaw had those roots, had that foundation in North Omaha. Finally, Leota. Leota Jones herself has a fascinating history. She just passed away in the last decade. But before that, her lasting legacy was actually a record store that she ran on Ames Avenue. And before that, further into the near north side. But Leota stayed in tune and attuned to civil rights in Omaha all of her life, and she continued to be an activist and stay involved. The next generation after Dorothy obviously reflected her influence. Her own sons, Harry Ewer and Daryl Ewer, went on to start the Afro Academy for Dramatic Arts that was active in Omaha from the 1970s all the way into the 1990s. Their work influencing Black actors, Black directors, Black theater professionals continues to impact Omaha today. And well, Harry and Daryl have stayed involved in the city in a whole variety of ways. So that's a fascinating legacy to think of all those people and all that action, all extending from Tomorrow's World Club. A couple of high school students doing the hard work of researching segregation in Omaha and actually taking that work and making it a foundation for the future. The club was essentially like a leadership incubator, right? It's one of these fancy things that today youth leaders want the opportunity to participate in. And even in North Omaha, they're still creating those opportunities. But this was more than 60 years ago. So the legacy is huge. There's a great quote from James Baldwin, who said, nothing can be changed until it's faced. And basically what Tomorrow's World Club did was take the silent force of Jim Crow in Omaha and make it overt, make it explicit, draw it out, and put a name to it. This is employment discrimination. We have to do something about it. I want to encourage you to look into your own family's history. Find out how they fit, where they fit, when they fit into North Omaha history. Send me a note, info@northomahahistory.com, or go to the website. I'm Adam Fletcher, and this has been another look at the hidden history of North Omaha. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording and start a new one. So
this is the making of the sausage. I love this part.
Yeah. I thought about turning my video off, but I thought, well, we're showing the making.
You're part of the face, so. Man. They need to see a couple of white guys sitting around talking about all the things.
Yeah, I'm the ugly old white guy, but
no, man, you're the George Clooney, and I'm the Matt Damon. I mean, we got this. Let's go.
Sure. Okay.
I just like Ocean's 11 a lot. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the record button again, and we'll do Omaha School for Tinkerers and Tailors. And record to this computer. Okay. In this episode, we explore Omaha Technical High School, once the largest school in the world under one roof. We'll dive into the school's unique tinkerer philosophy, which provided a vital vocational pathway for working class students and celebrates the trailblazing graduates like Tuskegee Airman Alonzo Davis and basketball legend Bob Boozer. Adam's also going to share reasons why it closed and more. Go ahead, Adam.
Steve, it's hard to overstate the apparent magnificence of Tech High. Anytime that anybody gets a whisper that there's any new information about it, there is so much broadcasting, whether that's on social media or in person. People having vibrant conversations because everybody's got a story, either about the building as it is today, the building that their grandparents went to, the building that mystified Omaha for generations. It has deep roots, man. And I want to explore some of that. I want to get into this idea of this ancient Greek temple kind of architecture right there at 30th and Cumming. Gigantic facility. Today, it kind of looks like another big building. Back when it was built, it was the largest building, not only in Omaha for a school, but in the entire world. It's hard to wrap our head around that scale and that size and that scope. But it comes down to this. In the early 1900s, there was a movement in American education. It had become public. Everybody was going to school around 1900. The child labor phenomenon of the 19th century and the 1800s, that had kind of disappeared. Kids weren't working in factories as much anymore. Kids weren't standing on the corner selling newspapers as much anymore. They weren't working on farms as much anymore. America was becoming more industrialized, and Omaha was one of those cities. There was a leader in the education field who proposed that Those young people who were coming to school and not doing well needed ways to build their skills more effectively. This leader's name was John Dewey. And John Dewey was the father of what we call today career and technical education. But he was also important to what we call democratic education, because John Dewey believed and taught American teachers that schools shouldn't just exist to make better workers for the factories. Schools shouldn't just exist to make better taxpayers for the public. Schools shouldn't just exist for people to make money off of. He thought that schools should exist for democracy's sake, so that we can have a more informed public who are better at being lowercase d Democrats, making good choices in voting, being active citizens, being part of their community, these novel ideas. That was John Dewey more than 100 years ago. He wrote a great book called Democracy in Education, and it really laid the foundation for how America should change and transform its education system at that point. There were lots of big changes that were already happening. Schools were extending from 8th grade, when everybody used to graduate, to 12th grade for graduation. They were putting on 4 more grades. And originally in Omaha, where it had Omaha High School, that small little building on the hill that eventually became Central, Central High was exclusively for students who could pay tuition for the first 50 years of its existence. We don't talk about that, but that was the reality of Omaha High School. It had tuition. Another reality of Omaha High School was that it was considered a fortune to go there, not just because of the tuition, but because you, as a young person who was capable of working, wasn't going to work. Instead, you were going to go sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day, maybe even do some extracurriculars, some sports. But what did that mean for the every kid? People like my family would have been at that point. We were farmers. My family were German immigrants and English immigrants who farmed. And we might have had a store here or been a school teacher there. But the reality is, it was hard to break that mold. My ancestors, my farmer ancestors, go back not hundreds of years, but thousands. So we came to North America, and we went to school instead of worked in the fields. Eventually, we went to college. But that didn't work for everybody. There were lots of people who went to school and struggled, and they didn't make it through. Central, what was Omaha High School, didn't appeal to them. So what did they do when it was time to go to high school? Well, originally in 1912, Omaha Public Schools opened up a special school for students who had to do things with their learning. But it wasn't Tech High. Instead, it was a school called the Fort Street School for Incorrigible Boys. This is one of my favorite stories in Omaha because it's one of the least known. Imagine a big wooden building that was up at 30th and Brown, just south of 4th Street, up by Metro Tech, not ironically. This big wooden school that was filled with printing presses, that was filled with a wood shop, that was filled with telegraph machinery, so that students could learn practical skills instead of just reading, writing, and arithmetic, instead of the classics in a liberal education, liberal arts education, instead of phys ed. They were learning how to do things with their hands, because teachers were learning that doing things with their hands helped them do things with their minds. John Dewey took this idea and he applied it across the board. One man was responsible for woodshop. One man was responsible for home ec. One man was responsible for all those experiences extending not just from these one-off isolated buildings, but becoming an American phenomenon where entire generations became educated in vocations, in trades, and in things that they could do not just for the sake of doing them, but actually to make a living and become successful citizens later on. That was John Dewey's vision for democratic education, and luckily, Omaha Public Schools picked it up. And Fort Street School blew up in popularity. It went from 200 students in its first year. By 1914, they had 480 students, and that poor little building at 30th and Brown was bursting at the seams. Kids who lived in South Omaha were riding horses and horse-drawn wagons to get to North Omaha to go to the Fort Street School for incorrigible boys. Omaha Public Schools, in the meantime, built a fancy new building on Dodge Street. and they called it Commercial High School. And Commercial High School was this formal building where instead of learning the trades and all of the stinky work of making print and all of the hard work of making wood shop and whatever happened in there and all of the bending work of making telegraphs, you could learn commercial trades. You could learn how to be a salesperson. You could learn how to be a tailor. You could learn how to make advertisements. And Commercial High School became a little bit of a phenomenon in the 19 teens. But by 1921, Omaha Public Schools came up with a new plan. They came up with a vision. There was a really successful neighborhood that was located just south of Cumming Street and just west of 30th. It was called Gifford Park. It still is called Gifford Park, and it's centered around Gifford Park. It was the home of the Duchesne College, a private Catholic school that also had an academy for younger women to go to. It was the home of a successful Yates Elementary School, which at that point went all the way to grade 8. It was the home of large houses, beautiful homes that surrounded Duchesne and were involved in that. And it was right on the edge of the Gold Coast Historic District as we know it today, mansions lining Cumming Street. And a couple of those still stand up at 37, 36, up to 40th. Cathedral was right there. You know, the Cathedral neighborhood, the one that surrounds St. Cecilia's. Those fine homes needed a fine school to match their fine ambitions, but North Omaha needed a place to bring those students who were workers. And Omaha Public Schools wanted a place to bring John Dewey's ambitions. So they built a brand new school. They took the tinkering at the Fort Street School for Incorrigible Boys, and they took the tailoring at Commercial High School, and they brought them together into one facility, and that became Omaha Technical High School. And when it opened in the 1920s, it really was the largest school building in the world. Then it became the largest building in North America when somebody else beat it out. And then it became the largest school building west of the Mississippi. And today it's still just a really, really big school. Others have been built and modeled off of it. When it opened, Tech High was phenomenal. All kinds of great things. Centering on the curriculum of makers, Tech High had unique vocations, including commercial sewing, fashion, domestic arts. They had auto mechanics, printing, electrical work, and machinery right at the core of the school's curriculum. So not just a few students, not just those kids, quote unquote, but actually every student had a chance to learn career work. They diversified education so that it wasn't just academics only, but a direct pathway into the middle class, because all of those occupations allowed working class Omahans to get and own a house, to buy and own a car, to have and hold dreams for the future. Imagine a machine shop providing those jobs today. Omaha at that point was beginning to burst at the seams. More and more African Americans were moving to the city from the South. In the 1910s, Omaha's Black population doubled, and those students needed places to attend school. So Tech High became one of the first integrated school experiences in all of Omaha. African American students had gone to Omaha High School since the 1870s. It was strictly segregated before that, but they'd gone since 1870s. We have records of the first Black graduate from Omaha Public Schools in 1876. But they weren't allowed at other high schools. And frankly, a lot of other high schools didn't exist. South High was the only other school in Omaha at this point. North High wouldn't open until 1926. And of course, Burke and West Side, they weren't even on the radar. Prep High School did exist, and it was segregated all the way into the 1940s and 50s. But Tech High brought in Black students. In 1937, just over a decade after it opened, 15 years, 16 years, the first ever African-American valedictorian in Omaha, Nebraska graduated from Tech High School. 1937, his name was Alphonso Davis. Alphonso Davis became a legendary Tuskegee Airman from Omaha, a red tail who went off to Italy and flew missions over Germany and shot down more than 30 enemy planes in his red tail. Captain Davis was lost. He became missing in action when his plane was presumably shot down over Italy. And today he's celebrated in several ways throughout the community, recognized for that Black greatness. He's one of several Tuskegee Airmen who eventually came from Omaha, but he was the first ever Black valedictorian in Omaha Public Schools. Eugene Skinner. You might be familiar with Skinner Elementary School up off Ames Avenue. You might be familiar with Eugene Skinner when he was a district assistant superintendent for Omaha Public Schools. You might be familiar with Eugene Skinner because he was the first ever African-American principal in Omaha Public Schools. But did you know that Eugene Skinner was also a graduate of Tech High? Bob Boozer. So many other Black graduates came from the high school. The reality, though, is that there was a Jim Crow effect that was going on in the building throughout its existence for a very long time. And the reality was that Jim Crow reality kept Black teachers from becoming teachers at Tech High for Black students or white students. Tech High didn't hire its first African-American educator until the 1970s. The first ever Black coach at Tech High was a man named Gene Haynes, who I grew up knowing as Brother Haynes, because Brother Haynes would stand in the hallway as the vice principal of Omaha North High School, and he'd say, "Brother Sassy, you better get to class. Hit the bricks." I still see him standing there. He was a really imposing guy. Brother Haynes still alive. Brother Haynes still jumps on my Facebook every now and then for North Omaha history. You should check it out if you're not there already. But he'll put a comment on. He'll pipe up. And he's part of this legacy of Tech High. Several other teachers went to Tech and taught at Tech and came from that reality. But the truth is that when that first African-American teacher was hired there in the 1960s, 1963, Tech had a long legacy of Jim Crow already at work. Now, that said, in addition to Alphonso Davis, in addition to Bob Boozer, a lot of other people graduated from Tech. A couple of great war heroes from World War II. Brigadier General Kenneth Walker was a U.S. Air Corps Medal of Honor recipient in World War II. He graduated from Tech. Captain Howard Kethett, it was a recipient of the Bronze Medal and the Purple Star, or Purple Heart and Silver Star in World War II. Politicians who went to Tech included Ernie Chambers, Roman Haruska, who was a former U.S. Senator, Johnny Rosenblatt, the mayor of Omaha, who they named a baseball stadium after eventually, and Jim Dore, all went to Tech. The school also had a lot of the 20th century's most important athletes of all times graduate from the high school, let alone from Omaha. We talked about Bob Boozer, Bob Gibson, Johnny Rogers. The list just goes on and on. Ron Boone became a professional basketball player, but there were people like Lucy Wilson, a track team member from Tech who went on to the Olympics. Lewis Hart, a political scientist. Lots of football players. Jim Houston was a national rodeo champion who graduated from Tech. Football players, Steve Vacanti and Danny Fulton and Ike Mahoney. The list just goes on and on. Basketball players. I mentioned Ron Boone, Fred Hare. Again, Jack Urban. I mean, just all kinds of different sports folks and politicians and all kinds of notable people just really kept the school vibrant and alive. One of the most popular teachers ever was one of the longest lasting principals in Omaha Public Schools. His name was Carl Palmquist, and they named a stadium after him. He was the principal of Tech for 20 years, from 1950 through 71, and a lot of people remember him for a lot of reasons. Ernie Chambers' legacy at Tech was remembered because he actually went to the school not only as a student, but came back as a community advocate for Black history to be taught at Tech High. He went directly to Carl Palmquist. He went to a history teacher named Sally Keating, and they had real conversations and actually taught Blacks in American history right at Tech High because of Ernie's advocacy in the late 1960s and early 70s. And the reality is the school continued on and the drum beat harder and harder. But there were some pains, there was some suffering, and there was some hard times that really hit the school. After World War II, Tech High boomed. It became huge. The population of the building just ran rampant. Of course, North Omaha evolved a lot in that period as well. Between 1945 and 1963, North Omaha had a housing boom that filled in a lot of neighborhoods and built new neighborhoods north of Ames, west of 42nd, and just filled in. Benson area filled in, the Dundee area filled in with nicer houses, more sophisticated. But even North Omaha itself, the Florence Field neighborhood, the Florence neighborhood, the older neighborhoods that had old housing stock got new housing stock. A lot of things evolved and changed. Urban renewal started to kick in, though. And part of urban renewal was transforming Cumming Street, which Tech High sits on, transforming that into a highway-like structure. Where it used to be just a 2-lane, it became a 6-lane at 30th and Cumming. And then carried high-speed traffic with the idea of not slowing them down as they went west. The area around Cumming Street devolved and began to become more industrial. The residential areas around Cumming, south of Cumming, were almost completely gone after World War II. And then the North Freeway construction began. In the 1950s, they planned to put North Freeway from I-480 all the way up to I-680. And they targeted first the area from where I-480 is today up to Lake Street. They demolished in just that area alone more than 500 houses and businesses. Cumming Street was changed forever, but so was the residential fabric that tied together North Omaha as that highway went in. The impact of the freeway led to a physical barrier within Omaha's African American community. It also segregated further and drew a very strict color line between Bemis Park and Kellam Heights and other North Omaha neighborhoods. White flight began to really happen and pick up in the early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. 24th Street's commercial area began deteriorating in the 1950s. Well, white flight took white people further west, first to the areas west of 42nd, then to the areas west of 72nd. African Americans weren't allowed to live in those neighborhoods. Real estate agents wouldn't sell to them. Real estate insurers wouldn't insure them. Banks wouldn't lend money. And Black people were kept in the near north side. That's how redlining worked, even after 1940, even into the 1960s. So that huge population at Tech High in the post-war era began to decrease pretty quickly. Black schools in North Omaha got more segregated, not less, during that time, because more and more white people were deciding that they didn't want their white students or children to go to Black schools with Black students. Now, today, you'll hear a lot of people be defensive about it. Their own parents took them out of those buildings and brought them to West Omaha. They went to West Side. They went to Ralston. They went to other suburban districts. They went to West Omaha schools like Northwest originally, or Burke High, when those were segregated buildings. African Americans just weren't allowed to live there. But in the 1960s, the Fair Housing Act kicked in, and the movement for integration happened. White people rebelled against that, moved, and caused that white flight, but Black people started to get better houses. They started to move out of the near north side, and Tech High's population continued to decline. For the first time, Black people started going to Northwest High School, Burke High School, Prep High School as it moved out of the near north side. And Black people started choosing different buildings as they could afford it. There was a shift in educational philosophies at the same time. John Dewey's theories about democracy and education and the purpose of workers learning changed. And the reality is that that tinkerer model, tinkerers and tailors, disappeared. And instead of seeing the importance of this castle, this gigantic Greek temple, continuing to serve that purpose, the district started to say, hey, we can't afford to do this anymore. People don't want to go here. They're not interested in what you're offering. And so we're closing it. And in 1984, Tech High officially closed. Doors were sealed. The lights were turned off. People went there for school no more. A thing happened though in the 1990s, several years after it closed, after it sat empty, where Omaha Public Schools realized that it needed to do something different. People kept using this phenomenal auditorium at Tech High, 2,000 seats, marble lined, just glorious. And they still got into the building. A group called the Tech High Restoration Committee started renovating that space. The district started looking new at the building and saying, wait a second, our offices are spread all over. Maybe we could use those differently. Maybe we could bring everybody together under one roof. Maybe we can repurpose Tech High. And so what they did, they moved the district offices, all the formal stuff for curriculum instruction and discipline and assessment and all the different things that Omaha Public Schools do. They moved them from the Joslin Castle and a couple other spaces that they had around the city, and they brought them all together under one roof in what was now called the Teacher and Administrative Center for Omaha Public Schools, TAC. And TAC took over Tech. Another really cool thing happened, though, as the building's usage evolved. In 1996, a new space called the Skinner Magnet Center was started, and it was in honor of Eugene Skinner, who we mentioned earlier, named in his honor, but they focused on performing arts, technology, and math to teach a small group of students about those things inside the building. In the late 90s, the district opened up a career center at Tech High. They offered a whole lot of different skilled and technical science courses. They talked about they taught automotive technology. They taught collision repair and refinishing. They taught construction. They taught electrical systems technology. They taught motorsports repair. They taught welding. They taught professional services, commercial design, culinary skills, digital video production, health occupations, and the Career Center looks more and more like the original Tech High. So the building today is still being used for the purpose that it was originally designed more than a century ago, from 1923 to 1984. The future of Tech High continues to evolve. People have all kinds of visions for this building. And who knows? Maybe the district will stay there forever and those offices are happy the way they are. Or maybe they'll find a new home central to Omaha and Tech High can open again as the powerhouse that it is for more students. We'll see. But in the meantime, this has been a history of Technical High School. If you're interested in learning more, go to northomahahistory.com or check out my books called North Omaha History Volumes 1, 2, and 3, where I detail this history and you can read all about it. My name is Adam Fletcher Sassy. Thanks for having
me. Okay. And hit the stop recording on that part. The next one we've already done, which is the Beltline. We've already done one. Yeah. Oh! Well, we got two in the can here. We'll be fine. I mean, I hope to get this produced this weekend. I'm
glad you caught that, Steve, because I wouldn't have caught it.
Yeah. Well, being the rail fan that I am, I shared it across all the rail fan websites, and
it was on your brain.
So, and I took note of it because I'm a rail fan. I think I've told you this before. We used to live in Benson, north of Benson.
Yeah.
Just off 63rd between Military and Ames. So we weren't too far from Leola's, and I was doing a Sunday morning radio show. I did it from 85 to the end of 97, beginning of 98, called the Jazz Brunch. And it was on a variety of radio stations. One station would get tired of it, and I'd find another station that wanted to pick me up. And then, finally, it kind of ran its course for me. But I always used to go up to Leola's and order the records I needed. And she was the nicest lady, and she just got a big kick out of me coming in there and befriending her and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool, Steve. I have to admit, Leola's was up there when I was in high school. And one of my friends is actually her grandson. Oh. And I went in there a couple of times. It was not a space for me to go into, but I still went in And I looked around and I found some CDs and I might have bought some used ones. I don't remember, but it was one of those spaces, and North Omaha is still this way, where there's spaces that white people just aren't supposed to go.
Oh, yeah.
And Leola's kind of had that vibe the whole time, and that's no diss, that's no rip on anybody. It's creating safe spaces for Black people to be in, and I can understand that now. But back then, it was just like, I'm gonna go again and see what I like, and I just tried, and it was a learning experience. I
Well,
remember when she passed, though, it was a really big deal in the community. People
yeah.
really miss her.
And I used to go in there. I was selling printing at the time, so I could. I didn't go in on the weekends. I kind of went in during the slow times and stuff.
Yep,
But when I would walk in there, Mr. Steve,
yep, that's
and
cool.
yeah,
That's cool.
so
So you
I
were part of that. You were part of that hipster jazz scene. I had a friend growing up, one of my parents' friends. He helped, like he really did expand my horizons. He took me down to the Magic Theater. Do you remember Magic Theater?
mm-hmm, I sure
He took
do.
me down there. I was in a couple plays down there, and he really introduced me to that. But he brought me to a couple different jazz performances. I was friends with when I was a kid. I knew Orville Johnson
Boy, that
keys.
name sounds familiar.
Keys. He played piano
Yeah,
just
yeah.
in a lot of spaces. And actually, his biography is one that I need to write. His wife was her name was Cervelia, and they were just huge figures, huge people in the community. But they were that first experience, and I could still hear the. I went to a church in North Omaha when I was a kid that was called Christ Love Unity Church. It was on Ellison at 29th Street in a big old house. But I can hear his piano just fill up that whole space with that organ sound. But and his wife sang classic in addition to them both doing jazz work. And Orville, he was recorded a bunch of times using a lot of different bands and whatnot. But I didn't know that when I was a kid. The things that you don't know. And it was one of those things that learning about in the last 15 years and all this research and stuff is just like, oh, I knew those people and I went to those spaces. This friend of my parents, his name was Chuck Deuce, and Chuck was one of those cool old Vietnam veterans who always wore sunglasses and always had a goatee. I couldn't get into the sunglasses everywhere I went, but I decided that I'd have a goatee for the rest of my days, and that was when I was a kid. So it's still rocking, it still works. But just funny stuff. That's what I took away from Omaha's jazz culture. That's a long story short. Was my
Well,
goatee that gave me permission?
mine was, I did play Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis, and believe it or not, they had some very accessible stuff that
Yeah.
but it was probably more along the lines of what they called smooth jazz in those days.
Yep.
I didn't play the Barbara Streisand. The smooth jazz stations played a lot of stuff that like Barbara Streisand. I didn't play that, but uh, because it had to be fairly. I mean, it was on Z92 and then CD 105, and it was on another station
You
too.
worked the whole circuit, man. Anywhere that
I
it
worked
take
the
you.
whole circuit, and
I can't believe
but
Z92 played it.
yeah, it was when it started, it was jazz fusion, and KQ98, where I'd been at before, that's now Sweet 98, but it was progressive rock. And back in those days, we'd play Stanley Clark and Return to Forever and all that kind of stuff. So that's what it was supposed to be. It kind of migrated into some other things because the station wouldn't go out and get the music for me, that we
Right.
played, and I couldn't remember what we played back in those
Right.
things. So,
Right.
did Gail Sayers go to Tech?
Well, the fast answer is no.
Central?
Here, let me get to my notes. Gail graduated from Central.
Central. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, okay. Let's end it here. I'll get these things produced, and we'll. I'm going to go ahead and shut off the YouTube. Let's see.